I'm Undine, 35 years old, and I've spent my whole life trying to be the perfect daughter. Despite building a successful career as an art curator in Chicago, family approval remained elusive. Last week I visited my parents in Portland for their anniversary. The trip ended with my brother Jake's cruel words, "No one wants you here." What hurt most? My parents nodded in agreement. I didn't argue. Just packed my bags and left. This morning my phone was blowing up with 12 missed calls. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button if family drama gets your heart racing as much as mine. Growing up in Portland wasn't easy for me. Our middle-class neighborhood was filled with perfect families who seemed to have it all figured out. Mine looked that way too from the outside. But inside our two-story colonial, with its immaculate lawn, I always felt like I was performing for an audience that never quite appreciated the show. My father, Thomas, worked as an accountant at a prestigious firm. He was tall, commanding, and emotionally unavailable. When he walked into a room, his presence demanded attention. He reserved his rare smiles and proud glances for my younger brother Jake. Those looks never seemed to find their way to me, no matter how hard I tried to earn them. My mother, Elaine, had been an elementary school teacher before becoming a full-time homemaker when Jake was born. She was softer than my father, but in conflicts, she always deferred to him. Her passive nature meant she rarely stood up for me when Dad's favoritism became obvious. Instead, she'd offer quiet consolation later in private moments that felt more like pity than protection. Jake was 3 years younger than me, but he might as well have been the firstborn for all the attention and privileges he received. He was charming and athletic, the type of boy neighbors adored and teachers favored despite his mediocre grades. While I spent weekends studying, Jake played football with Dad in the backyard, their laughter floating through my bedroom window as I prepared for another academic competition. The pattern started early. When I was 7, I won first place in the school spelling bee. I came home clutching my certificate, bursting with pride. Mum smiled briefly and said, "That's nice, honey," before turning her attention back to Jake's scraped knee from his latest playground adventure. Dad barely looked up from his newspaper. But when Jake scored his first soccer goal a week later, there was cake at dinner and a new pair of cleats the following day. I learnt to find validation elsewhere. My teachers praised my intelligence and dedication, Mrs. Wharton, my 4th grade teacher, once told my parents during a conference, "Undine is the most promising student I've ever taught." I watched my father shift uncomfortably in his chair while my mother smiled tightly. On the drive home, all they talked about was whether Jake would make the travel soccer team. By high school, I had resigned myself to being the invisible daughter. I poured myself into academics and art areas where Jake showed little interest or aptitude. I thought perhaps by carving out my own territory, I could finally earn my parents' recognition. I graduated as valedictorian, earned a full scholarship to study art history at Northwestern University, and felt a glimmer of hope when my father actually patted my shoulder at graduation. That hope dimmed when he said, "At least we won't have to pay for your college. More money for Jake's tuition," instead of expressing pride in my achievement. The scholarship that would save them thousands of dollars was dismissed as impractical. My mother suggested teaching might be a better path than art history. "Something to fall back on," she said, as though my passion was a temporary whim rather than a calling. Meanwhile, Jake struggled through community college with barely passing grades before transferring to Portland State. His mediocre performance was celebrated as perseverance. When he finally graduated with a business degree after 5.5 years, my parents threw an elaborate party. My magna cum laude graduation from Northwestern the year before had warranted a dinner at Olive Garden. I moved to Chicago permanently after college, building a career at the prestigious Hamilton Gallery. The distance provided some relief from the constant reminders of my second-tier status in the family. Phone calls home became less frequent, holiday visits more strained. Each time I returned to Portland, the disconnect grew wider. Last year, when I was promoted to assistant curator after years of dedicated work, I called my parents with the news. My father's response was, "That's nice. Did we tell you Jake is thinking about starting his own business?" My accomplishments were always stepping stones to redirect conversation toward Jake. Despite everything, I maintained the fantasy that someday they would see me, truly see me and the woman I'd become. That one day I'd hear genuine pride in my father's voice, or receive more than a perfunctory hug from my mother. So when their 35th anniversary approached, I requested time off work and made plans to visit, ignoring the knot of anxiety that formed in my stomach. I had just been promoted again, this time to head curator, a prestigious position that people in my field worked decades to achieve. I was only 35. I imagined sharing this news at their anniversary dinner, finally seeing that spark of pride in their eyes. I carefully selected anniversary gifts, a rare first edition of my father's favorite author, and a handcrafted silver necklace for my mother. I boarded the plane to Portland with hope and trepidation in equal measure. If I'd known what awaited me, I might have never gotten on that flight at all. The moment I stepped through the front door of my childhood home, I sensed something was off. My mother greeted me with her usual light hug, but seemed distracted, her eyes darting toward the kitchen where voices echoed. "You're finally here," she said, checking her watch, though I was exactly on time. Everyone else arrived hours ago. Everyone else meant Jake and his wife Natalie. I hadn't realized they were coming early. I'd carefully scheduled my flight to arrive the day before the anniversary celebration, thinking I'd have time to settle in and perhaps enjoy some rare one-on-one time with my parents. I wheeled my suitcase into the foyer, taking in the familiar scent of my mother's cinnamon candles and furniture polish. The house looked immaculate as always, family photos lining the hallway. I paused, noticing for the first time that most were of Jake. Jake's graduation, Jake's wedding, Jake and Natalie on vacation in Hawaii last year. The few that included me were family group shots, where I stood slightly apart, my smile never quite reaching my eyes. From the kitchen came boisterous laughter. My father's voice boomed, "That's my boy," with an enthusiasm I'd never heard directed at me. I smoothed down my carefully chosen outfit and applied a bright smile before entering. Jake sat at the kitchen island, Natalie beside him, both beaming as my father clapped Jake on the shoulder. My mother busied herself with a tray of appetizers, her face flushed with excitement. "There she is," Jake said, turning toward me. "The Chicago artist finally graces us with her presence." Curator?" I corrected gently, setting down the gift bags. "I work with artists, I'm not one myself." "Same difference." Jake waved dismissively. He'd never bothered to understand my career despite my attempts to explain it over the years. My father gave me a quick nod, his attention immediately returning to whatever Jake had been saying. "Go on with what you were telling us," he prompted, as if my entrance had been a minor interruption. "Well," Jake continued, reaching for Natalie's hand, "as I was saying, we wanted you guys to be the first to know." He paused dramatically, looking at his wife. "You're going to be grandparents." The kitchen erupted in excitement. My mother actually squealed, rushing around the island to embrace Natalie. My father's eyes glistened with tears as he pumped Jake's hand vigorously before pulling him into a rare hug. In all my 35 years, I'd never seen my father cry. "How far along?" Mother asked, already placing her hand on Natalie's still flat stomach. "Just 12 weeks, Natalie replied. "We got the all clear from the doctor yesterday." "This calls for champagne," my father announced, heading to the wine fridge. "Not for you, of course," he added, winking at Natalie. I stood frozen, clutching the straps of my purse, completely forgotten in the family tableau. Of course I was happy for Jake and Natalie. They'd been married 3 years, and I knew they wanted children. But the timing of their announcement, right as I arrived right before our parents' anniversary, felt deliberate. Once again, Yesh had ensured he was the centre of attention. "Congratulations!" I finally managed, moving forward to hug Natalie. She at least seemed genuinely glad to see me, returning my embrace warmly. "Thanks, Undine. We're so excited. I hope you'll be a hands-on aunt, even from Chicago." "Of course," I promised, then turned to my brother. "Congrats, Dad." I said, the joke falling flat as I moved in for an awkward side hug. Through dinner, I tried repeatedly to find an opening to share my own news. The conversation revolved entirely around the baby names they were considering, how they'd decorate the nursery, Jake's plans to convert his home office into a baby room. "I can help with that when I visit next," my father offered immediately. "We can make a guy's weekend of it, building furniture, painting walls." "That would be great, Dad," Jake said. "I'm clueless about all that stuff." "I just got some good news too." I tried during a brief lull. "The gallery promoted me to head curator. It's quite a big deal, actually." "Head curator," my mother repeated, her tone, suggesting she was trying to figure out what that meant. "Yes, I'm now responsible for the entire artistic direction of the Hamilton. I'll be selecting all major exhibitions, working with collectors' artists." "Speaking of the nursery," Jake interrupted, "we're thinking a space theme. Natalie found these amazing glow-in-the-dark stars online. And just like that, the moment was gone. My father launched into a story about how Jake had loved space as a child, a fact I'd never known, despite living in the same house. My mother began discussing baby shower plans with Natalie. My promotion, the culmination of years of hard work, vanished from the conversation as if it had never been mentioned. I excused myself early, claiming jet lag, and retreated to my childhood bedroom. It had been converted to a guest room years ago, all traces of my youth erased. Jake's room, I knew, remained largely intact, his sports trophies still displayed proudly, his high school pennant still on the wall. As I prepared for bed, I overheard my parents and Jake in the hallway. They weren't being particularly quiet. "Undine seems the same," Jake said, his tone suggesting this wasn't a compliment. "I worry about her," my mother replied. 35, still single, no prospects. All she has is that job. "That job pays very well, Elaine," my father said, surprising me with even this mild defense. "Money isn't everything, Thomas. Look at Jake and Natalie starting a family. That's what matters in life. Undine just hasn't found the right path yet," Jake said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Not everyone can be as lucky as I've been." Their voices faded as they moved downstairs, but the damage was done. All she has is that job, as if my career, my passion, my independent life I'd built from scratch meant nothing. As if without a husband and children, I was somehow incomplete, unsuccessful. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering if coming home had been a mistake. The anniversary celebration was still 2 days away. I wasn't sure I could maintain the facade of the dutiful daughter for that long. The next morning, while helping my mother prepare for the anniversary party, I noticed something that stopped me cold. On the dining room sideboard, she'd arranged framed family photos for display at the celebration. There were dozens chronicling my parents' 35 years together. Wedding photos, vacation snapshots, holiday gatherings, and in almost every family photo from the last 20 years, I'd been cropped out. In one Christmas picture, half my body was visible at the edge of the frame, clearly cut to focus on my parents and Jake. In another, from a family vacation to Mount Hood, only my arm remained in the shot around my mother's shoulder. It was as if they were systematically erasing me from family history. When I returned to my room that night, I noticed something else. The wall of family photos in the hallway had recent editions photos from holidays I'd missed while working in Chicago. New family traditions had formed in my absence. They'd moved on without me, and perhaps they'd never really wanted me there in the first place. The day of my parents' anniversary party dawned bright and clear. Despite my growing unease, I was determined to make the best of it. I rose early to help with preparations, arranging flowers and setting up chairs in the backyard where the celebration would be held. My mother fluttered around the house in a new dress, checking details and giving instructions to the catering staff they'd hired. My father polished his dress shoes in the den periodically, calling out questions about the timeline for the day. Jake and Natalie arrived mid-morning, Jake immediately taking over the music setup, dismissing my carefully curated playlist of my parents' favourite songs. "Mum and Dad want something more upbeat," he informed me, though I hadn't heard them say any such thing. "And I'm handling the slideshow during dinner." Slideshow? This was news to me. Yeah, a retrospective of their 35 years together. Natalie and I put it together as our gift, collected photos from everyone, set it to music. It's going to be the highlight of the party. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. "When did you ask me for photos?" Jake barely glanced up from his laptop. "Must have slipped my mind. Besides, you've been gone so much, you're not in many of the important moments anyway." I bit back a retort. This was my parents' day, and I wouldn't ruin it with an argument. Instead, I retreated to the kitchen to help the caterers, throwing myself into work, as I always did when emotions threatened to overwhelm me. Guests began arriving at 4. Family, friends, my parents' colleagues, neighbours they'd known for decades. I played the role of gracious daughter, accepting compliments on how well I looked, deflecting questions about my personal life, smiling until my face hurt. Mrs. Kaufman, my mother's best friend, squeezed my arm when no one was looking. "It's good to see you, Undine. It's been too long." "Work keeps me busy," I explained. "So I've heard. Your mother mentioned you got some kind of promotion. She wasn't clear on the details. At least my mother had mentioned it to someone." "Yes, I'm now head curator at Hamilton Gallery." Mrs. Kaufman's eyes widened. "Good heavens, that's impressive. You must be one of the youngest head curators in the country. The youngest in Hamilton's 100-year history, actually. You always were the smart one," she said. Then glanced toward Jake, who was holding court near the bar. "Though your brother certainly got all the charisma." It was meant as a compliment to both of us, I knew, but it stung all the same. Intelligence valued less than charm substance, overshadowed by style. The story of my life. Dinner was served at 6, followed by speeches. My father spoke lovingly about meeting my mother in college, their early struggles, the joy of starting a family. He talked at length about Jake's birth, the day our family felt complete. I was born 3 years before Jake. In my father's narrative, our family wasn't complete until my brother arrived. Jake's speech was charming and funny, full of anecdotes about growing up with such wonderful role models. He spoke as if he'd been an only child, never once acknowledging my existence. Neither did my parents in their thank you speech, though they effusively praised Jake and Natalie for organising the event, despite my having handled most of the actual work. Then came the slideshow. The lights dimmed as images flashed across the screen set up in the backyard. My parents' wedding, their early apartments, the purchase of our family home. Then my mother pregnant, but not with me. Jake as a newborn, as a toddler starting school. Family vacations where I was either absent or barely visible at the edges. Jake's graduation, sporting events, his wedding to Natalie. In a 45-minute presentation chronicling my family's life, I appeared in perhaps 5 photos and never as the focus. It was as if I'd been a temporary house guest rather than a daughter, a footnote in the story of their lives. When the lights came up, I slipped away from the table, needing a moment alone. I found myself in my father's study, a room I'd rarely been allowed to enter as a child. Family photos lined his desk, all featuring Jake. Awards and certificates covered one wall, Jake's academic and athletic achievements proudly displayed despite their mediocrity. I was searching for any sign of my existence when Jake found me. "What are you doing in Dad's office?" he demanded, his earlier charm replaced by suspicion. "Just needed a minute away from the crowd," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Right. Kind of pistone." He didn't believe me. "Everyone's asking where you went. Way to make Mum's special day about you." That broke something in me. "About me? Are you serious right now?" "Here we go." Jake sighed dramatically. "Poor Undine, always the victim. I've spent my entire life being ignored by this family," I said, my voice rising despite my best intentions. "I wasn't even in the slideshow of our family history." "Because you're never here," Jake shot back. "You ran off to Chicago and barely looked back. You think your fancy art job makes you better than us." "I left because there was no place for me here." "I visit when I can. I have a career, Jake. A successful one that I've built entirely on my own because our parents never supported my choices." "Oh, please. They paid for your education." "I had a full scholarship. They didn't pay a dime while they funded your 5.5 years of college keg parties." Jake's face darkened. "You've always been jealous of me." "I'm jealous?" I laughed bitterly. "Of what? Your mediocre accomplishments that get celebrated like you've won a Nobel Prize, the way you manipulate our parents into thinking you're perfect, while I can barely get them to acknowledge my existence. You think you're so special with your curator job. Nobody even knows what that means. Meanwhile, I'm giving Mum and Dad what they actually want, a grandchild, a legacy. What are you giving them besides disappointment?" His words hit like physical blows. Before I could respond, our parents appeared in the doorway, faces tight with anger. "What is going on in here?" my father demanded. "We can hear you all the way outside." "Undine's having one of her moments," Jake said immediately, his voice calm, now reasonable. "She's upset about the slideshow." My mother looked at me with disappointment. "Really, Undine, today of all days?" "I wasn't in it," I said quietly. 35 years of family history, and I was barely included. "Okay, c'était." My father waved dismissively. "Don't be dramatic. This isn't about you." "It never is," I replied. "I was cropped out of the photos on the sideboard too, and the wall in the hallway. It's like you're trying to erase me from this family. Maybe if you were around more, you'd be in more photos," my mother suggested, as if my absence was a choice I'd made rather than a response to years of rejection. "I'm building a career, a life, one you've never shown the slightest interest in." "Because it's just a job," my father said. "Family is what matters. Look at what Jake and Natalie are creating. And what have I created that's so worthless? I'm the youngest head curator in the history of one of the most prestigious galleries in the country. I've curated exhibitions that have travelled internationally. I've published articles, received awards, none of which you've ever acknowledged." "There you go again, making everything about yourself," Jake interjected. "This is exactly why no one enjoys having you around." The room went silent. I looked at Jake, then at my parents, waiting for them to contradict him. To say, of course, they enjoyed having me around, that I was their daughter, that I was loved. Neither of them spoke. "Is that true?" I finally asked, my voice barely audible. "You don't enjoy having me around?" Jake crossed his arms. No one wants you here, Undine. Not like this, not with your constant need for validation and your chip on your shoulder. I turned to my parents, silently pleading with them to deny it, to defend me just this once. My father looked away. My mother stared at her hands. Their silence was confirmation enough. I see, I said, sudden calm replacing the storm of emotions. I won't impose on you any longer. I walked past them up to my room and began mechanically packing my suitcase. No one followed me. No one tried to stop me. I could hear the party continuing outside, laughter and music floating up through the open window as if nothing had happened. 20 minutes later, I carried my bag downstairs. The house was empty, everyone still in the backyard celebrating. I left the anniversary gifts on the kitchen counter with a brief note, "Congratulations on 35 years, Undine." Then I walked out the front door, called a rideshare, and left my childhood home for what I suspected might be the last time. I didn't cry, I didn't look back. I just felt numb like a limb that had fallen asleep and was only starting to register pain as sensation returned. I checked into an airport hotel, planning to catch the first flight back to Chicago in the morning. As I lay in the generic room staring at the ceiling, I kept replaying Jake's words and my parents' silent agreement. No one wants you here. After 35 years of trying to earn their love, I finally had my answer. And strangely, along with the pain came something unexpected. Relief. The relief of finally stopping a fight I could never win. I woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains and the insistent buzz of my phone. 12 missed calls. My first thought was that my parents had realized their mistake, that they were desperately trying to reach me to apologize. But as full consciousness returned, I knew better. My family didn't apologize, especially not to me. The calls weren't from my parents or Jake. They were from Patricia Kaufman, my godmother and my mother's oldest friend. 2 from family friends who had attended the party. 3 from neighbors I'd grown up around. Even 1 from my high school art teacher, Mrs. Gallagher, who had apparently been at the celebration. I listened to Patricia's voicemail first. "Undine, honey, call me as soon as you get this. I saw what happened last night. That slideshow was unforgivable, and the way they treated you after. Please call me. I'm worried about you." I hesitated, then dialed her number. Patricia answered on the first ring. "Thank God. Where are you? Are you okay?" "I'm at the airport Marriott," I said, my voice hoarse from unshed tears. "I'm fine." "You are not fine, and no one would expect you to be after that ambush. I've known your parents for 40 years, and I've never been so disappointed in them." Her frank acknowledgement of what had happened broke something in me. Tears I'd been holding back spilled over. "They don't want me, Patricia. They never have." "Oh, sweetheart." Her voice softened. "I know this isn't the right time, but there are things you should understand about your family. Things I've seen over the years, but never felt it was my place to say. I'm checking out in an hour. Could we meet for coffee?" We arranged to meet at a cafe near her home. I showered and dressed mechanically, feeling disconnected from my body. The Uber ride to the cafe passed in a blur of familiar Portland streets that no longer felt like home. Patricia was waiting in a quiet corner booth, 2 cups of coffee already on the table. At 70, she remained elegant and sharp, her silver hair cut in a stylish bob. She'd been a constant presence in my childhood, the one adult who seemed to see me when others looked past. "You look exhausted," she said as I slid into the booth. "Did you sleep at all?" "Not really." I wrapped my hands around the warm mug. "What did you want to tell me?" Patricia sighed deeply. "This isn't easy, and maybe it's not my place even now, but after last night, I can't stay silent anymore." She took a sip of coffee, gathering her thoughts. "Your father always wanted a son. When you were born, he was disappointed, though he tried not to show it. Your mother says he didn't hold you for the first week. This shouldn't have hurt after all these years, but it did. When Jake came along, it was different. Thomas was besotted from day one. But the problem wasn't just that he wanted a son. The problem was that you were too much like him in all the ways that made him uncomfortable about himself." "What do you mean?" "You're brilliant, Undine. From the time you were tiny, your intelligence was obvious. You asked questions Thomas couldn't answer. You saw connections he missed. You were introspective, thoughtful, creative. All qualities Thomas suppresses in himself because his father taught him those were weaknesses, not strengths." I stared at her, struggling to process this perspective. "Every time you succeeded academically, every award you won, it reminded him of the path he didn't take. He was offered a scholarship to study literature at Yale. Did you know that his passion was poetry? But his father insisted he pursue something practical, accounting. Dad writes poetry. The concept was so foreign I could barely grasp it. Used to. I doubt he's written a line in 30 years, but seeing you pursue your passion for art, watching you build a career doing what you love, it's a constant reminder of what he gave up. That's not my fault, I protested. Of course it isn't, but people often resent those who make choices they themselves were afraid to make. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. As for your mother, she spent her entire marriage trying to please your father. When she saw how he favored Jake, she followed his lead. It was easier than confronting the truth. And Jake? Patricia's expression hardened slightly. Jake learned early that being your father's favorite had privileges. He's not entirely to blame, he was a child. But as an adult, he's chosen to maintain the dynamic because it benefits him. He's not half as successful as you are, Undine, and he knows it. Your accomplishments threaten the family narrative that he's the special one. I thought of all the times Jake had dismissively referred to my art job, how he'd interrupted when I tried to share news of my promotion. Last night when he said no one wants me there. He was protecting his position, and your parents were too cowardly to contradict him. It's not that they don't love you, Undine. It's that loving you would require them to face uncomfortable truths about themselves. We talked for nearly 2 hours. Patricia shared observations from decades of witnessing our family dynamics, moments I'd missed or misinterpreted. The time my father had proudly shown a colleague my published article in an art journal, only to minimize it when I entered the room. My mother secretly keeping a scrapbook of my accomplishments that she never showed me. Small evidences of love withheld out of fear, insecurity, and habit. None of it excused their behavior, but it helped me understand it wasn't simply that I was unlovable. The revelation brought pain and relief in equal measure. What do I do now? I asked as our meeting drew to a close. That depends on what you want. If you're looking for them to suddenly change to acknowledge how they've hurt you and make amends, I'm afraid you may be disappointed. People rarely change fundamental patterns, especially at their age. So I just accept it. Pretend it doesn't matter. No, Patricia said firmly. You decide what you're willing to accept going forward. You set boundaries. You build a life filled with people who appreciate you exactly as you are. And perhaps most importantly, you stop trying to earn love from people who don't know how to give it freely. I nodded, tears threatening again. I'm flying back to Chicago this afternoon. I've already changed my ticket. That's probably wise. Give yourself some distance. But Undine... She held my gaze intently. Don't let what happened define you. Your worth isn't determined by their ability to see it. As we parted, Patricia hugged me tightly. Call me anytime. And remember, family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's the people who want you in their life, even when it's difficult. Back in my hotel room, I called Dr. Lewis, my therapist in Chicago, and scheduled an emergency session for the following day. Then I contacted my assistant at the gallery to let her know I'd be back sooner than planned. Finally, I called the airline and confirmed my new flight. I didn't call my parents to say goodbye. They hadn't tried to reach me, not even once. That silence spoke volumes about the truth of Jake's words and their silent confirmation. No one wanted me there. At least now I could stop pretending otherwise. The Hamilton Gallery was buzzing with activity when I returned to work the following Monday. A new exhibition was opening in 3 days and final preparations were underway. I threw myself into the familiar rhythm of art installation, label editing, and press management, grateful for the distraction. Lucy, my assistant curator, watched me with concern. We'd worked closely for 3 years and she knew me well enough to sense something was wrong despite my professional demeanor. How was the anniversary party? She asked during a rare quiet moment as we reviewed the exhibition catalogue. It was... My voice caught unexpectedly. I cleared my throat and tried again, but nothing came out. To my horror, tears welled in my eyes. Lucy immediately closed the office door. Undine, what happened? The simple kindness in her voice broke the dam I'd built around my emotions. Words poured out the whole humiliating story of the slideshow, Jake's cruel statement, my parents' silent agreement. Lucy listened without interrupting her expression, shifting from shock to outrage. That's emotional abuse, she said when I finished. You know that, right? What they've done to you for years, it's abuse. I'd never framed it that way, even in my own mind. They're not bad people. I found myself defending them automatically. Maybe not. But they've treated you badly. Consistently. And you deserve better. My session with Dr. Lewis that evening echoed Lucy's assessment. We'd been working together for 3 years initially to address anxiety I'd attributed to work pressure. Now I could see the roots went much deeper. What you're describing is a classic family scapegoat dynamic, Dr. Lewis explained. One child becomes the repository for all the family's disowned feelings and problems, while another becomes the golden child who can do no wrong. But why me? The question that had haunted me for decades. Often it has nothing to do with the child themselves. As your godmother suggested, you likely reminded your father of parts of himself he'd rejected. Your academic success, your artistic sensibility, your independence. These triggered his insecurities, and rather than addressing them, he projected his discomfort onto you. We discussed strategies for processing the rejection and moving forward with clear boundaries. Dr. Lewis suggested increasing our sessions temporarily to work through the acute trauma of the anniversary weekend. "This is an opportunity," she said, as our time drew to a close. "Painful as it is, having the dynamic so clearly exposed allows you to stop participating in it. You can release the hope that they'll suddenly become the parents you deserved and focus instead on building relationships with people who value you." That night, I lay awake in my apartment overlooking Lake Michigan, replaying my life through this new lens. How many decisions had I made trying to earn my parents' approval? How much energy had I expended seeking validation from people constitutionally unable to give it? The next morning, I reached out to friends I'd somewhat neglected while focusing on my career. Sophia, my college roommate, who now taught literature at the University of Chicago. Marcus and David, a couple I'd met through an art history seminar, who had become close friends. Jenna, a fellow curator from the Museum of Contemporary Art, who'd been trying to get me to join her book club for months. "I'd love to come to book club," I told Jenna over lunch, "and maybe we could start that collaborative exhibition we've been talking about. The one on female artists reclaiming domestic spaces. I thought you said the Hamilton board wouldn't go for it." "They might if the head curator makes a compelling case." I smiled, feeling a new confidence in my professional judgment without the shadow of parental disapproval. 2 weeks after returning from Portland, I invited my friends for dinner at my apartment. I'd always enjoyed cooking, but rarely entertained, telling myself I was too busy. The truth was, I'd internalized the message that my home, my life wasn't worth sharing. As my apartment filled with conversation and laughter, I realized how much I'd been missing. These people knew me, the real me, not some idealized daughter I could never become. They celebrated my promotion with genuine enthusiasm. They asked questions about my work and actually listened to the answers. When I finally shared what had happened in Portland, their outrage on my behalf was healing. "Family is who shows up," Marcus said, refilling my wine glass. "Who sees you and loves you anyway?" "To chosen family." David raised his glass and everyone joined the toast. Patricia called weekly to check on me. During one conversation, she mentioned she'd run into my mother at the grocery store. "She asked about you," Patricia said cautiously. "What did you tell her?" "That you're doing well professionally, but that the anniversary weekend was deeply hurtful to you." She got very quiet. "Did she say anything?" "She said they didn't mean to hurt you." I told her intent doesn't erase impact. I waited for news that my mother had expressed remorse or a desire to make amends. But there was nothing, just as there had been no calls, no emails, no attempts to reach me in the month since I'd walked out of their anniversary party. Jake sent a text 3 weeks after the incident. "Mum's upset. You should call her." No acknowledgement of his role, no apology. I didn't respond. Instead, I channeled my pain into my work. I proposed a new exhibition concept to the board. Family mythologies, how relational narratives shape identity. It would feature artists exploring family dynamics through various media, particularly those challenging conventional notions of kinship and belonging. The board approved enthusiastically, impressed by my personal connection to the theme and the potential for audience engagement. Planning the exhibition became a form of therapy, allowing me to process my experiences through a curatorial lens while amplifying voices of artists with similar stories. Patricia visited Chicago in June, ostensibly to see a Broadway touring production, but really to check on me in person. We met for dinner at a restaurant near my apartment. "You look different," she observed, studying my face. "More peaceful." "I feel different, lighter somehow. I've stopped trying to solve a puzzle that was designed to be unsolvable." "Have you had any contact with your parents?" "My father sent an email last week. Very formal, asking about tax documents he needs for something." "Nothing about what happened, just business." Patricia sighed. "That sounds like Thomas." I sent the documents but kept my response brief. Professional. "And how did that feel?" I considered the question carefully. "Sad but not devastating. Like I'm grieving for something that never really existed in the first place." "That's a healthy perspective, May," she approved. "And Jake, Nothing directly. I saw on social media that Natalie had some pregnancy complications, but everything's fine now. Does that worry you, being disconnected from family news? Less than I would have expected. I admitted, I care about Natalie and the baby, of course, but I'm not responsible for maintaining connections with people who don't want to connect with me. Patricia reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I'm proud of you, Undine. I've watched you trying so hard for so long. It's good to see you finding peace on your own terms. The Family Mythologies exhibition opened in September to critical acclaim. Art critics praised its nuanced exploration of the gap between family narratives and lived experiences. Visitors left emotional comments in the response book, many sharing their own stories of family estrangement, reconciliation, or redefinition. I hadn't explicitly included my personal story in the exhibition materials, but my curatorial statement hinted at it. The families we're born into shape us, but they don't define us. Sometimes the most profound act of self-creation is choosing which bonds to honor and which to release. The night of the opening reception, surrounded by artists, colleagues, and friends, I felt a sense of completion. I'd transformed personal pain into something meaningful that resonated with others. For the first time, I was grateful for my experiences, not because they weren't painful, but because they'd led me here to this moment of authentic connection and creative purpose. As guests mingled around the gallery, Lucy approached with her phone in hand, looking uncertain. Your brother just called the gallery main line asking for you. He says it's important. My heart jumped though, whether from hope or anxiety I couldn't tell. Did he say what it's about? Just that he needs to speak with you urgently, something about your father. I excused myself to a quiet corner and called Jake's number, bracing for another confrontation or manipulation. Undine. He sounded different, subdued. What's going on, Jake? I'm in the middle of an exhibition opening. Dad had a minor heart attack this morning. He's stable, but they're keeping him for observation. Mum's pretty shaken up. The news hit me harder than I'd expected. Despite everything, these were still my parents. Is he going to be okay? The doctors say yes, it was mild, but it was a wake-up call. Jake paused, then continued in a rush. Look, I know things ended badly when you were here. Some things were said that, well, I've had time to think. And I kept my voice neutral. And I may have been unfair. Natalie's been on my case about it, actually. Says I've been a jerk to you our whole lives. It wasn't quite an apology, but from Jake it was unprecedented. The baby's coming in 2 months, he continued. Got me thinking about family, what kind of example I want to set. I don't expect us to suddenly be best friends, but maybe we could try to do better for the kid's sake, if nothing else. It was manipulative, using his unborn child as leverage. But I could hear something else in his voice too, a genuine uncertainty that was new. What exactly are you suggesting? Maybe you could come visit when Dad's recovered, meet the baby when it arrives, start fresh. I thought of Dr. Lewis's warnings about expecting significant change from my family, of the boundaries I'd worked hard to establish. But I also thought of Patricia's words about deciding what I was willing to accept going forward. I'd need some ground rules, I said finally. Real acknowledgement of the past, not just sweeping it under the rug, and respect for my life and choices going forward. That's fair, Jake said, surprising me again. It won't be easy, we've got decades of bad habits, but I'm willing to try if you are. We talked for a few more minutes about practical matters, when I might visit how to approach our parents. Nothing was resolved, but a door had opened slightly that I'd thought was permanently closed. When I returned to the exhibition, Sophia gave me a questioning look. Everything okay? My father had a minor heart attack. He's stable. Her eyes widened with concern. Are you all right? Do you need to go to Portland? Not right now. We're talking about me visiting later. I glanced around at the gallery filled with art exploring complicated family relationships. It's strange timing. Or perfect timing, Sophia suggested. You're stronger now, clearer about who you are. Maybe that's exactly when reconnection becomes possible, not when you need them to define you, but when you no longer do. Her words stayed with me as I moved through the remainder of the evening. I didn't know what would come of Jake's tentative olive branch, whether it would lead to genuine healing or more disappointment. But I knew I was approaching it from a different place, one of self-respect rather than desperate need for approval. As the last guests departed and the gallery grew quiet, I stood alone in the center of the exhibition I'd created from my pain. Around me hung artworks depicting family tables with empty chairs, childhood homes with doors both open and closed, portraits with faces half in shadow. stories of loss, forgiveness, boundaries, and belonging. I'd found my voice not despite my family's rejection, but partly because of it. I'd built a life rich with meaning and connection. Whatever happened with my parents and Jake going forward, I was no longer the woman who had packed her bags and walked away in silence when told she wasn't wanted. I knew my worth now, with or without their validation, and that perhaps was the most important homecoming of all. 6 months had passed since that fateful anniversary weekend, and fall was giving way to the first hints of winter in Chicago. My apartment, once a sparse gallery of carefully selected artwork, had transformed into a warm haven filled with photos of friends, souvenirs from weekend trips, and even a few thriving houseplants. Evidence of a life fully lived, not just a career well managed. It was 2 days before Thanksgiving, and for the first time in my adult life, I was hosting the holiday rather than making the obligatory trip to Portland, or working through it entirely. My dining table was extended to its full length, ready to accommodate the 8 friends who would be joining me tomorrow. The timer on my oven chimed, and I pulled out a test run of cranberry orange bread that filled the apartment with a sweet, tangy aroma. Cooking had become a form of meditation for me these past months, a creative outlet beyond the gallery walls. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia, boarding now, see you at 7. Patricia had flown in for the holiday, choosing my Thanksgiving celebration over my parents. Another small revolution in our family system. She'd become even more of a confidant since the Portland incident, a bridge between my past and present. My relationship with my parents remained complicated. After my father's health scare, I'd visited Portland twice. The first visit had been tense, with everyone walking on eggshells. My mother hovered anxiously, clearly wanting reconciliation, but unable to address the underlying issues directly. My father, perhaps humbled by his mortality, made awkward attempts at connection, asking about exhibitions in a way he never had before. Jake and I had established a cautious truce. Natalie had given birth to a healthy baby boy they named Samuel. Being Aunt Undine was still an identity I was growing into, complicated by the distance both geographical and emotional, but Samuel's innocent existence offered a new beginning of sorts. During my second visit, my father had surprised me by showing me a small collection of poetry books he kept hidden in his office desk. I used to write, he'd admitted gruffly. Nothing special. And Sanderson. It wasn't an apology for decades of emotional neglect, but it was a small opening, a tiny acknowledgement of the connection Patricia had identified months earlier. My mother had taken a different approach, throwing herself into grandmotherly duties, but occasionally making tentative overtures, like forwarding articles about art exhibitions she thought might interest me. She still couldn't directly discuss how she'd failed to protect me from becoming the family's scapegoat, but she was trying in her limited way to see me now. Dr. Lewis helped me navigate these complicated waters, reminding me that I could choose connection without expecting transformation. People rarely change completely, she'd said during our most recent session. The question is whether the changes they are capable of making enough for a relationship that doesn't diminish you. The jury was still out on that question, but I was approaching it from a position of strength rather than need. I had built a life full of people who valued me exactly as I was. My chosen family had become my primary source of support and joy, while my biological family occupied a more peripheral position. The doorbell rang, pulling me from my thoughts. It was Sophia arriving early to help with preparations as promised. "Something smells amazing," she said, unwinding her scarf and hanging up her coat. "Please tell me that's the famous cranberry bread you've been promising." Fresh from the oven, I smiled, cutting her a slice. "What do you think? More orange zest?" "It's perfect," she declared after the first bite. "Tomorrow's going to be epic." We spent the next hour chopping vegetables for stuffing and debating the merits of traditional versus experimental turkey preparations. Sophia had been my roommate at Northwestern, and though our paths had diverged professionally, our friendship had deepened over the years. She knew more about my family history than almost anyone, having witnessed my disappointed phone calls home and the telling absence of parental visits during college. "Have you heard from your parents about tomorrow?" she asked casually as we worked. "My mother called yesterday to wish me happy Thanksgiving since we wouldn't be together. She didn't actually ask why I wasn't coming home, which is progress of a sort. And your dad? He sent an email, very Thomas Jameson, 3 lines total, but he did say he hoped my dinner with friends would be enjoyable." Sophia raised an eyebrow. The quotation marks around dinner with friends feel passive-aggressive. "Baby steps." I laughed. 6 months ago, he wouldn't have acknowledged it at all. The truth was, I felt more at peace about my family than I had in years. Not because everything was resolved, but because I'd stopped needing it to be. The gallery was thriving under my leadership. My Family Mythologies exhibition had been extended due to popular demand, and I'd been approached about publishing a book based on the exhibition concept. When Patricia arrived that evening, she brought a bottle of champagne and an envelope. "What's this?" I asked as we settled in the living room after dinner. "Open it and see." Inside was a photograph I'd never seen before. Me at about 5 years old, sitting on my father's lap as he read to me, both of us completely absorbed in the book. "Where did you get this?" "It was in an old album of mine, from a summer barbecue at your parents' house before Jake was born. I thought you might like to have it." I studied the image, this evidence of a connection I had no memory of. "He looks happy to be with me." He was Undine, before his own issues got in the way. Patricia sipped her wine. "I'm not excusing anything that came after. But I thought you should know that there were moments when it was different." The photo stirred complicated feelings. Not regret exactly, but a wistfulness for what might have been had my father been brave enough to confront his own demons instead of projecting them onto me. "Thank you for this," I said finally. "It helps somehow." "I thought it might." She smiled gently. "How are you feeling about tomorrow?" "Good, actually. Really good. For so long, holidays were something to endure. This feels like something to celebrate. Because it's on your terms." "Exactly. These people are here because they want to be not out of obligation, and I can be myself completely." The next day, my apartment filled with friends arriving for Thanksgiving dinner. Marcus and David brought homemade rolls and matching autumn sweaters. Jenna came with her new girlfriend and a spectacular pie. Lucy and her husband arrived with their teenage daughter, who had recently begun interning at the gallery on weekends. Patricia completed our group, bringing decades of wisdom and her sharp wit. As we gathered around the table, platters of food steaming between us, I looked at these faces that had become my true north. People who had seen me at my lowest after Portland and helped me rebuild myself stronger. People who celebrated my successes without jealousy and supported me through difficulties without judgment. "Before we eat," I said, raising my glass, "I want to thank you all for being here. This past year has taught me that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about who shows up, who listens, who stays. All of you have done that for me, and I'm grateful beyond words." "To chosen family," Marcus offered, echoing the toast from months earlier. "To chosen family." Everyone repeated, glasses clinking. As conversation and laughter flowed around the table, my phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Jake with a photo of baby Samuel in a My First Thanksgiving onesie. Below it, he'd written, "We miss you today, maybe next year." I smiled slightly, appreciating the gesture while recognizing it for what it was, a small step on a long road. I texted back a heart emoji and a message, "He's beautiful, happy Thanksgiving to all of you." Then I put my phone away and returned fully to the moment, to these people who had chosen me as I had chosen them. My journey wasn't about rejecting my biological family, but about expanding my definition of what family could be. About creating space for relationships that nourished rather than diminished me. The family that matters isn't always the one you're born into, but the one you build with love, truth, and acceptance. I may not have gotten the family I wanted, but I created the family I needed. And in that creation, I found not only healing, but joy. So what about you? Have you ever had to redefine what family means to you? Has rejection ever led you to discover your own strength? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments. And if this resonated with you, please hit subscribe and share with someone who might need to hear that they too can create the family they need. Thank you for being part of my journey today. And remember, sometimes the most beautiful things in our lives grow from the places that hurt the most.